Hey guys, Miss Sigler here for AP World History. Today we're going to be talking about imperialism in Africa. Remember, we're in period 3, and this is going to run from 1750 to 1900. When we're talking about imperialism of Africa, okay, we're going to look at the European dominance within Africa. Okay, Africa had not been divided into sections, and that is going to happen with the European involvement there in Africa. Okay, and that is going to happen, okay, because the technology that comes from the industrialization period, okay, and you've got things like the bolt action rifle, right, which are going to allow them to reload faster, right, have more accuracy. And then, of course, you've got the machine gun where you don't have to have the accuracy in order to hit your target. And then, of course, you've got steamships, right? These guys are going to be able to travel into the interior of Africa. So, what had previously not Europeans had not been able to do, now they will be able to do. Remember, we talked about the tsetse fly and its impact on horses. And so, Europeans could not ride horses into the interior because their horses would be bitten and die. And now we had the development of all these factories across Europe, and now we're looking to find valuable resources in order to continue to produce goods in those factories. Remember, England has lost their American colonies, North American colonies, because of the American Revolution. Okay, so now they've got to find another source for resources. So they're going to move on to Africa. Now, with imperialism in Africa, I have already mentioned the steamships that they use to travel into the interior, but there's also some inventions in medicine like quinine, and this is to help Europeans deal with malaria that was very common in Africa. And then this whole period, this imperialism in Africa, is going to be known as the scramble for Africa. And this is going to be where the European nations are fighting constantly in order to get those territories. So, what they're going to do is they're going to have what is called the Berlin Conference. And the Berlin Conference is going to be basically headed up by Otto von Bismarck. And what ends up happening there is shown in these political cartoons. Okay, you've got essentially Africa is laid out before these guys in this meeting, and then they are going to claim portions of Africa with no regard to the tribes in Africa and whether or not they get along. So you can see here in this political cartoon, Bismarck is dividing up Africa for all the European nations. Here you've got the European nations surrounding Africa, and they are each claiming their own piece. Okay, we're going to come back to King Leopold of Belgium in just a second. We're going to talk about the way that he treats the people of the Congo. But basically, make sure you're familiar with the areas that each of these empires or these European empires are taking. Okay, because what is going to happen with this is that you're going to see conflict that is going to occur in Africa leading up to World War I. So this is going to help push World War I into occurring. Okay, and it's also going to lead to conflict and distrust and the lovely alliance system that is going to help create all the tension for World War I. So you've got here the British, they're going to take parts of West Africa. The Dutch and British will be in the south. North Africa will be taken by the French and the Italians, and the Ottoman Empire, which is still in existence, is going to be pushed out of North Africa. Okay, the Ottoman Empire will continue to exist up until World War I. Okay, and then they're essentially just going to lose bits and pieces, and a lot of that will come from internal struggle until eventually they disappear from the map. Okay, and then the Germans and the British will take Central and Eastern Africa. Okay, there's only a couple of places that will remain untouched. Okay, well, where did my PowerPoint go? All right, so let's talk about King Leopold for a second. King Leopold is going to be over the area of the Congo. Okay, and when they had the Berlin Conference, what they tried to do was divide up the territory, and then they tried to decide on how they should treat the Africans. Okay, so the whole idea here was that, they would go in and then they would try to make the Africans more like them, right? So they're going to set up schools, they're going to set up rail lines, hospitals, okay, and they're going to essentially try to educate them and make them look like the Europeans, okay, regardless of which nation that was. However, okay, you do have a lot of negatives that come with imperialism. You have the loss of culture, you have the internal conflict in Africa because of tribes that do not get along with each other. They will be pushed together because of this imperialism. And then you have the slavery, essentially, of the Africans by European nations because they're using them for mining and things like that. So Leopold, King Leopold over here, is going to treat his people of Africa, of the Congo, in such terrible ways. Basically, like, they had certain quotas they were supposed to meet. So there's one story about this man who did not meet his rubber quota for the day. And so the people who were over him came to his house. They killed his wife. They killed his 5-year-old daughter. And then they left him with the foot and the hand of his 5-year-old daughter in order to help him remember that he did not meet his quota. So there's a lot of barbaric stories that come out of the Congo because of King Leopold. And there's constant dismemberment of people who do not meet their quotas or of their family members. Okay, so this map is going to show you all of the countries that are involved in Africa and that have imperialized portions of Africa. This is going to show us the British Empire by 1920. There's a saying about the British Empire and that the sun never sets on it. And that simply is, if you were to look at a globe, the British Empire is so vast that the sun is always shining on some territory of the British Empire. The French Empire, okay, if you guys look at this, their large dominant portion will be in Africa between 1919 to 1939. And then we mentioned the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, they're dubbed the sick man of Europe. And essentially what happens is that you have the Balkan Peninsula that will start with their independence movements and this idea of nationalism, where they share that intense pride with people who share a culture and a language rather than borders with them. So they will start to revolt and cause internal issues. So the Ottomans are dealing with that. They are lagging behind in industrialization, and they're attempting to catch up with the Europeans. However, that is not going to happen fast enough. And we've already mentioned this about them losing territory to the European nations. Part of their empire territory will be lost to the European nations. And eventually, okay, this will come to an end, and we'll talk about the end of the Ottoman Empire and what that means. But just keep in mind that the Ottomans are still around, okay, and that they are still here leading into World War I, even though they are drastically smaller than what they were at the beginning of this period.